by one motion. Will be enacted by one motion without discussion. If discussion is desired, that item may be removed and considered separately. I had one item I had a quick question on for the statistical reports. Does anyone else have any items they want to pull out? So I guess may I have a motion then just to approve the Board of Trustees meeting minutes?
I move to accept the report.
In a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Roll call.
Oh,
I'll do a roll call. Yeah, okay. Trustee Hill, what is your vote?
aye.
Trustee Lynn Harris, what is your vote?
Aye.
Trustee Chen, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Chair DeWinter, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Vice Chair, oh, I'm sorry, Vice Chair Hill, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Trustee Lisa Diaz-Nash, what is your vote?
Aye.
Thank you.
So my question, forgive me if we've talked about this in the past. I was looking at the statistical highlights. The last item is circulation of ebooks. And my question is just, I think those numbers are pulled out of the main circulation numbers at the top of the chart, as it's a separate number. So I'm looking for confirmation that that is not already included in the circulation numbers.
You mean with the physical items like books and DVDs, etc.?
Right.
Yes, the circulation of ebooks is pulled out of the general circulation numbers.
Okay.
But you know what, Liz? I want to confirm that because I've never been asked that question. I'm pretty sure that is what we do, but I could be wrong. So I can let you know that I can confirm that with the group in 24 hours.
Okay, that'd be great. My interest is mostly to do with the branches. I'd just be curious to know if those if those numbers at the top include the ebooks, right?
Okay, I would think that they would because we count ebooks as books, but the fact that they're pulled out at the bottom, I want to confirm that.
Trustee Diaz-Nash?
Just thought of a question when you asked that. How are we thinking about reporting year over year for the coming 12 months? Because that will be such really a nonsensical number because the pandemic is so unique, hopefully. And wondering if staff has thought about how they want to look at the numbers. Is it versus the year before as the last quote unquote normal year, or?
Well, I don't think that I don't think that that's been decided. You know, obviously the last year was anomalous, and I think in a number of ways that is, what we're doing, using the previous full year as a comparison for regular times. So we haven't had a formal discussion on it, but I think that's, probably what we would do. As you probably noticed, the information that I shared regarding fines, etc., it was a little complicated to gather because of the way the last year went. And that the information that I reshared was basically the information that Ruxana had shared back in late 2019. And I didn't really think it was reasonable to try to go too in depth in comparing numbers for 2021 or the fiscal year we're entering, because that was the last regular year. If you have any ideas, that I'm all ears, but I think we will probably just mark the last year and a half. There'll just be an asterisk. And I think most everyone will know, that it was an unusual year and difficult to measure it without the context of a worldwide pandemic. Yes.
I guess whatever is going to be most useful to you
Mm-hmm.
would be my first comment. Because
Mm-hmm.
you shouldn't just report numbers to report numbers. What's
Mm-hmm.
going to help you understand opportunities or weaknesses? But I wouldn't think you'd want to totally get rid of the last
Right.
week numbers, because seeing what a huge drop off or a huge increase or a huge
Mm-hmm.
shift also is good learning. It's just not, it's a different kind of learning. So I would just take both of those things into consideration as you discuss it with staff.
I will, and I totally agree with you. I suspect that, and we've said this, but I think it's really going to become more clear. I suspect that, there's no return to normal, and that we are going to see some changed behaviors, even once we return to full operation, that there are going to probably be some people who use the e-resources more and continue to do so. Just as, like a cinemas may be finding that more people are streaming and not necessarily just going back to going to the cinemas because they've been forced to learn about this new option. I think that individually, many of us are going to continue using Zoom and Teams for meetings that we normally may have, met in person. So it'll be interesting to see which of the behavior changes stick. And we can look at the pandemic year maybe as a kind of reset of sort, and change, a marking point in change behaviors and what we may have to respond to.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments on the statistical reports? Okay. So may I have a motion to approve the statistical reports?
I so move.
I second.
So we do a roll call.
Yes. Trustee Diaz-Nash, what is your vote?
Aye.
Trustee Chen, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Trustee Lynn Harris, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Chair DeWinter, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Vice Chair Hill, what is your vote?
Aye.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we'll move on to the public comment. Persons wishing to comment on any item not appearing on the agenda may submit to the recording secretary a request to speak form. State law prevents the board from taking action on any matter not on this agenda. Your comments may be referred to staff for further review. Okay, let's move to old business. Item 3, potential late fine elimination at the San Mateo Public Library. So I'll turn that over to you, Director James.
Okay, so just as a refresher, and I understand that for Trustee Lynn Harris, for Rod, this may be a bit of a challenge, but I don't know exactly how this is handled. If you feel like you don't have enough information, we could try to catch up on some things between now and the next meeting, or you could recuse yourself, or if you feel that you do, abstain from voting, or if you feel that you do have enough information, then obviously you can vote. But this is a resumption of a conversation of a review that had begun in about September, October of 2019. I believe it was paused right around that time too, just before December. And then we all know what happened in early 2020. At that point, this wave of fine elimination was really picking up steam across the country. And, I hesitate to speak about small rural libraries because I just don't know a lot about what they're doing, but I can say definitively that that libraries in larger metropolitan areas, particularly across the Bay and across the whole United States, have since that time seemingly accelerated in the elimination of late fines. To distinguish, late fines are not the same as replacement fines. If you lose an item in this situation, the person is still responsible for paying for it and still can lose their privileges. And in some cases, the billing for the item, some libraries have elected to send the bills sooner, which in some ways actually works to get items returned sooner. When we left off, we had tried everything we could within our capacities to provide the Board of Trustees with as much quantitative information on fines, the number of patrons who were excluded from services because of late fines, the initial reasoning for many libraries to eliminate fines was a question of access and particular communities being penalized. I think we got stuck on that one because San Mateo only has 4 zip codes. And within those zip codes, there are wide ranges of incomes, household incomes. And that's one of the things that we discovered when the Deputy City Librarian, Rukhsana Singh, gathered information on fine distribution by zip codes. So unlike a city like San Francisco, which is very stratified in its neighborhoods by income and in some cases race, we could not say, well, this particular area of at-risk families, largely African-American, are obviously being excluded from library uses based on what we could find from the data. We just simply couldn't do that. And so there was no way to make a definitive case for doing this for the ostensible reasons of inclusivity. However, there was the argument that a lot of library staff persons, not myself included at the time, thought that it was the morally right thing to do. They also thought that it would free them up to work on more important things and stop spending dollars to collect pennies, and would reduce some of the tension and conflict that comes between patrons and staff around fines. There was also this factor, that it was becoming very evident that in PLS, we were becoming one of the few libraries that was still charging fines. That number has shrunk even more, and soon we will be the only one. From my standpoint, as you saw in my report, I personally think that we have reached a point and will soon reach a point. The last director I talked to who has not definitively set a date for final elimination is Daly City. And Shayla Anderson informed me that she expects, although it's not written in stone, she expects that they will probably have fines eliminated by September or sometime shortly thereafter. Library systems like Daly City, San Bruno, even South San Francisco.
Library visitors.
Sorry.
The library will be closing in 15 minutes. The restrooms are locked 5 minutes prior to closing.
Sorry.
Please visit them before then. Thank you.
They are dealing with much tougher financial situations than we are, and they are even trimming hours after the pandemic. Menlo Park is fiscally conservative, and they are all deciding to eliminate fines, which may seem counterintuitive. But I think they're doing it for the reasons that I mentioned before, is that at least they feel that there are people being denied access to the library based off financial reasons, which goes against our general service principles. And they probably are also realizing what made me evolve on this issue, along with a couple of other things, which is that it is basically becoming an untenable practice. It is basically becoming an obsolete practice. Is no way to deny that. How it doesn't mean that a library has to eliminate fines. It just means that they will be anomalous. So where we land is that since the last time we spoke, we have not been able to definitively show, despite the information that we gathered, that there was any particular group that was being penalized by fines. I personally never felt that library fines were so onerous that if a person returned items in a reasonable time or communicated with the staff, that the fines couldn't be worked out. Although I do know for some people in dire straits, it is a real challenge, but in general, we try to work with them. I think the city manager at the time felt, and he may still feel, that the amount of money that we collect from fines is small, but can be put to good use. From my standpoint, the amount of money that we are collecting from fines, and I shared this in the package, has been decreasing precipitously for the last decade plus. I expect it will only decrease because a considerable amount of the fines that we collected were from other PLS libraries. And in general, if they've eliminated their fines, we're only going to get less money because the fine money is usually kept at the library where it's collected. And a lot of people across the peninsula use San Mateo Public Library because of the quality of our main library and our central location. So I expect those fine numbers to go down, to shrink to possibly even below $10,000 a year, if not more. Link Plus, which charges $1 a day for late fines, has basically told public libraries that they would like for us to eliminate the Link Plus late fines. Years ago, most PLS libraries eliminated fines for seniors after reducing them to 10 cents a day from 25 cents. We still charge seniors 10 cents a day for late fines, but that was increasingly becoming untenable. Most PLS libraries, including us, eliminated fines on items, youth items, several years ago. So basically, there's just been this shrinking pool of fines to where even if you strongly, as a director, strongly were against the elimination of fines, it was like the pool was just drying up around us. And there were just, it was just becoming a situation where there were so few things that were being fined that collecting them has just started to make less and less sense. Add to that the fact that PLS and many other library systems have decided on automatic renewals. Basically, a patron can have an item out for 3 weeks if no one else is waiting. Rather than charging the patron or making them have to remember, most libraries have taken to automatically renewing it for the patron. They thought this was a wonderful courtesy and gesture, and most patrons did respond very positively to that because they didn't have to think about it. Automatic renewal will renew an item up to 5 times, and that was a negotiation because the county library wanted unlimited automatic renewals. I was one of the people who said we should limit it to 5 because we need to get some items back on the shelf for browsing. But because of that 5 automatic renewals, 5 times 3, that's 15 weeks, almost 4 months, an item could be automatically renewed. Those are situations, again, where patrons are not being fined because the library is providing a courtesy of renewing the item for them. Basically, public libraries have decided that they don't want to penalize patrons for keeping the items late if they don't have to. So from my standpoint, as I put in my note, I think it is very difficult to say, as some libraries have said, as a county library said last year, after we eliminated fines, our circulation went up 15%. I think it is very difficult for them to say that that is directly a result of the elimination of fines. In some cases, I think libraries or public libraries are stretching the correlation. What is correlation to make it causation? However, there is some reasonable data in some instances that many people have returned because their fines were eliminated. And in some cases, there's been a, fine jubilees. In many cases, we eliminated a lot of fines by doing the food for fines at the end of the year. So I must conclude at this point that the payoff for continuing with fines does not justify the potential downside, in my view. I think that we could look miserly or curmudgeonly compared to our companions in PLS and have many of our patrons asking why we're not doing this when every other library is doing this. It makes it challenging for us to sync up with them on a number of initiatives. It is basically a low-hanging fruit item that does not bring in much income. And I never thought it was valuable for income. I thought that it was most useful for getting things returned. And one of the things I have found positively in reviewing the literature is most libraries at this point, 1 or 2 years in, have not seen a significant uptick in late items or lost items, and neither did we, because fines have continued to be suspended here during the pandemic, and people are returning their items on time at pretty much the same clip that they did before. So I fully support whatever the board's recommendation is. I still think there are legitimate arguments for either side. And as far as I know, I checked with the city manager on this again, because this is a fiscal matter. What the board does is makes a recommendation as a citizen representative to the council. At that point, it will be up to the council, the city manager. They probably will ask for some input from me to decide ultimately on fine elimination. That said, I believe that the board's recommendation will carry considerable weight because the city council obviously is not spending a lot of time looking closely at this issue, and they will have expected that you all.
Will be closing in 5
Sorry.
minutes. Garage closes when the
That's
library-
great to hear. It's wonderful to hear you're closing.
They will
You just opened.
expect that you all will have your recommendation will be based on careful conversation, consideration, and review. So I think that I have covered all the main issues. The one last thing I would like to add is that I was able to clarify Finance Director Rich Lee's response by reading it again. He always speaks in accountant language. So he comes short of saying that if fines are eliminated, that they're going to fill the gap in our budget. What he says is this: every 2 years, we get together and we ask for the budget that we think that we need with finance. And what he said was the city sees library services as a public good and do not want to penalize the library for doing something like fine elimination, which could increase access and is a public good. Therefore, when we sit down with them in January and February to discuss our next 2-year budget, like I said, he comes short of saying we promise to fill the gap. What he says is we will take that into account and we will do our best to accommodate what you all think you need to fulfill your mandate. And it is always some discussion and some negotiation. But that says to me, that's as close as the finance director will come to saying we will guarantee. And I think the last full year that we collected fines, it was about $50,000. I see that number, like I said, over the next year, couple of years, going seriously. I really do think this to 30, 20, and probably 10, and we would have to be defending it to our patrons.
Great, thanks so much. I just want to open it up to the trustees to see if anyone has something they want to talk about related to what Director Moore provided. Trustee Diaz-Nash? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you, President DeWinter. Since it's question period, I had two clarifying questions for Director Moore. Number one, I recall way back in 2019, years and years ago, that City Manager Corbett was not quite so accommodating in his perspective on what would happen with the budget gap. And that he was fairly clear in his direction to you that you would have to find the money somewhere else if you chose to recommend eliminating fines. What I'm hearing from Director Lee is that while it's not a guarantee, they understand every other library is doing this and it's public good, and people are probably doing more online anyhow, so the pool is shrinking. So we're going to try and figure a way forward. So, you know,
I can respond
yeah,
if that's
thank you.
kind
Thank
of
you
your
very
question.
much. That's
Sure. Actually, and you know, my memory is not 100%. I don't think that City Manager Corbett said, you know what, you're just going to have to find the money on your own. What I think he said was it may just be, and I think at the time the amount was $50,000, which represented something like less than 0.5% of our budget. His view was that's still $50,000 that could be used for books, DVDs, etc. Also, I think that the city manager, and I actually strongly agreed with him at this time, felt that people were not necessarily being penalized by fines, that it was a valuable opportunity, that it was a good tool to encourage people to return items in a reasonable amount of time for the public good and for others to have access to them. And in some cases, it could be a valuable teaching lesson, although many libraries take the perspective of, well, we're not here to teach values. I feel a little more nuanced. I think that the city manager is still on the fence. I think that he still thinks that it may, that we need every penny that we can get, and that it may discourage people from turning things in on time. However, at that point, this is the last announcement. I promise.
Thank you for visiting the library today.
However, at that point, the final elimination movement was still relatively new. In my search for this meeting, I found far more information to dig into, even some academic reports that support that people in general are returning items on time. I also think that he would put considerable weight with what I see from my standpoint. And what I see from my standpoint is that it appears to me to be untenable to continue with charging fines for the San Mateo Public Library to continue as the only library in the Pacific Library System. And I think that, it's possible we could have to absorb it. I think that they will try to make up the difference, but there are poorer libraries than us that are having to absorb it. And quite honestly, I just feel like at this point, we're either going to have to figure out a way to address it, whether that means absorbing it or slightly increasing our budget in the upcoming months or over the upcoming years. because it really does feel to me at this point inevitable. But I still think the city manager is on the fence from the standpoint, and he's a former finance director too. He's on the fence from a standpoint of, does it encourage delinquency of returning items? And hey, that money is valuable, but I think I could also clarify to him now, whether or not we eliminate fines, that money pool is going to be shrinking anyway, because the other libraries that we collect fines for are not going to be charging.
Good point. Okay. I just wanted, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to get to Trustee Chen and first, and then Trustee Lynn Harris. Then we'll circle back. Yeah. So Trustee Chen.
Thank you, Chair DeWinter. I mean, just for to add a little bit to the picture for Trustee Lynn Harris's benefit, I mean, James and staff have like a tremendously rich trove of data, so I think there's no dearth of data. But just to catch Trustee Lynn Harris up, as part of this process, during 4 weeks, and I think it's late 2019, I think, I went to the main library and through the branches and did a admittedly statistically insignificant survey of patrons. So I'm just going to share the data that I found just to add to the pool, just so that you have everything you have, all the data for your consideration. So it's just a multiple choice question. There are 4 possible answers about like whether the patrons supported eliminating fines. The choices were yes. Depends on yes, depending on how many people are helped, to the access point. Yes, depending on what programs might have to be cut to compensate for the loss of monies, or no, not at all. And of the responses, it was kind of evenly spread. There were 2 yeses, 3 depends on how many people are helped, 3 depends on what may have to be cut, and 1 no. So it's just data for your benefit. But I would say it's compared to the treasure trove of expert data that Director Moore and his staff have found, it's a small contribution, but nonetheless, I did want you to have the fullest picture.
Yeah, that is interesting to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Lester.
Trustee Lynn Harris.
Thank you very much, Lester. I really appreciate that. And thank you, James, or excuse me, Librarian Moore. No, seriously, my bad. For all the materials that you provided, because as you noted at the outset, I was not present for the initial discussion, but through reading what you provided, and I actually did a little bit on my own and went to a couple libraries and spoke to some people. So I don't have the level of knowledge that those of you else on the call do, but at least I feel somewhat qualified. My question would be, and you kind of touched on this, I just was not aware what the money that the fines, where the fine money went. And I'm wondering if there's been an impact. We see, from the figures you've provided, the declining revenue over the last decade. Has that been an impact on the library? Because 10 years ago it was $140,000, $150,000, whatever. Now we're down to 30 or 40 if you were to extrapolate 2020 out. So I'm just wondering, yes, now we're dealing with and let me back up half step. I realize this is a little niche because the bigger picture is what all the other libraries are doing. But I'm just wondering, has there been an opportunity cost by the loss of 6 figures over the last decade or so?
Well, let me add a couple of things. First of all, there are some people, if you saw from the materials that I shared, there are some people that feel that they're not in support of fine elimination.
Yeah.
They tend to be older patrons, and they just think it is a moral and a teaching lesson in general. And one thing I've thought about was doing another survey, a wider survey than what Trustee Chen did. And I still think about it right now, but I do think we have enough information. Now, regarding the opportunity cost, it's really hard to say, because could we always use an extra $50,000? Yes, we always could. And since I've been here, the amount of fines being collected has had already dropped substantially.
Mhm.
I think that every
We're
single,
all downstairs ready to go. You should be too, so please come on down if you're upstairs. Thank you.
that's it. I think that every single public library, with the exception of a few really wealthy libraries like the New York Public Libraries that has hedge fund directors give them $100 million. I always point to Berkeley as a very anomalous library because they tax themselves considerably and they have more money than any other library in a city of that size that I know of by far. For a city of our size, we're doing pretty well. I would say we're upper middle class. And so we're not struggling. We don't have to cut hours. We don't live off of fines. I think the fine money probably allowed us to do some more in the way of programming, maybe do some more in the way of filling in our collection. But if you spread it out across our whole budget, like I said, it represents less than 0.5%. And I think that every public library has a bit of a challenge of getting its piece of the pie, although we all agree that it is a wonderful and valuable public good, but it has its challenges because of public safety, which tends to get a lot more financial and political support from people who are actively involved in the political process. So last year is not a good way to measure because we came in way below budget. We returned a lot of money to the city. We were asked to save money and we returned a lot of money to the city. And unfortunately, we were not like, hey, here, you can have some of it back because you did such a good job. It's just absorbed into the pool. And we felt no stress last year. But I think that because of just the fact that we need new buildings, we are constantly being asked to do a wide variety of things, which is sort of a compliment. Yes, we could always use more money. However, the 50,000 in shrinking that we get from fines is not going to solve the issue of fixing the older branch libraries, nor is it going to help us to address the fact that the new main library is now over 15 years old and has to have some of the aging aspects of it addressed. So yes, it's valuable, it's helpful, but I think in comparison to the stress that it creates for some patrons, even patrons who are not financially strapped, the stress that it creates for staff and perhaps the amount of time that staff spends on trying to collect the fines and account for the fines, it is probably, in my mind, a wash, and maybe even a bit of a drain. So
That's helpful.
yeah.
Trustee Diaz-Nash, were you going to say something earlier? I just wanted to get back to you.
Yeah, thank you. I just had a second question, Director Moore. For clarification, is staff thinking of recommending any changes to replacement fees? Like if someone doesn't bring a Chromebook back?
Mm-hmm.
I read in the materials that a lot of the libraries had tested changing that versus the fines, and also doing more frequent reminders that, something. So what's the thinking on that account?
We haven't gotten to the specifics, but to me, that's what would make me most comfortable. And I think the staff would agree. I think one of the ways to offset the elimination of late fines is to send out those, to shorten the time between when an item becomes late and when that patron is notified that they are going to be charged for the item. So I'm not sure exactly what it is for us now. I think it's about 3 weeks after it's capped at about $10 in fines. And since there are no late fines, as you pointed out, I might be these are some of the details that I think I can go back to staff, get recommendations, and then we can incorporate it in a conversation with you all to review and have you talk about what you think is the best from your standpoint. But I would be in favor of shortening the amount of time between when a person goes late and when they receive a bill for the item. That seems to work. And as has been pointed out, and I think the literature really supports this as well, that often, sadly, the people who go into billing, either they're the people who say, oh my gosh, I just forgot this, I got the bill, let me bring it back, or they are sometimes often people who are already in a situation where it's very difficult for them to manage and keep up with the stuff. And they end up unfortunately losing some of their borrowing privileges anyway. That's my observation, because fines or no fines, they just find it difficult to bring things back. And it's not just bringing it back late, because that's never been a big issue. We typically will work with someone if they bring something back late. It's often they lose stuff. And in this case, that just simply doesn't change. If you lose stuff and you don't bring it back, there's very little we can do for you, except to allow you, if you can find a reasonably priced copy on your own, and it's something we can circulate, we will accept that, but you have to replace it. And that's been that way, it will be that way. And I think the elimination of fines will really help those people who generally bring things back anyway, and they just lose track of it for a little while or whatever. And like I said, those people who do that, they already get 5 renewals. And I am very thankful for the 5 renewals.
Yeah. Trustee Lynn Harris?
Yes, thank you, Chair DeWinter. James, sorry.
That's okay.
My apologies, librarian Moore.
Oh.
No, obviously it said in the literature many times that that fines are not a deterrent to people keeping their things. It also said, if I understood correctly, that steep fines, although I didn't see steep defined anywhere specifically, are a deterrent. Have you heard anywhere any instance of a library that increased its fines into the quote unquote steep range? And if it did, if that served as a deterrent to people not bringing their things back?
Interesting question. So I haven't heard of it, but I do know that these things are handled very widely, very, very widely by region. And I would imagine that there are some parts of, first of all, I've never really heard of steep fines until that article. My idea of a steep fine is the $1 a day that Link Plus charges when you're late, and they're already saying, we want you to end that, although they can't make us, but they are saying we want everyone to end that. So I do find that that's a version of a steep fine. It's 4 times the regular amount that a person is charged. And it typically makes people more mindful of, in my experience, of trying to get the things back, because they don't want to have $1 a day add up. But my guess is that, and I said this in my notes, I qualified this in that this is largely, at least initially, something that's being done in libraries in metropolitan areas that serve larger cities, etc. I can imagine that there are some more rural, conservative places where they may charge more in fines. They may see it more of as a moral issue, and they may they may be philosophically against the elimination of fines. And as I noted, in a way, I was philosophically against it to begin with. I came around because I just don't think there's much to gain from it. I do think it's going to help some people. And frankly, I think it's inevitable. But steep fines would be Link Plus. And in my view, the steep fine is when you get that bill that says, if you don't bring this DVD back or this book back, you're going to have to pay $40 to replace it, or $50. And I've paid that bill for lost items that my son has lost. And even though I could afford it, I was very unhappy with him.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Trustee Hill, did you have anything to add?
You know, I think that we've more than covered the issues. I'm ready to vote my opinion.
Okay. My take is it is sort of inevitable that we're going to eliminate, but I think we do it in conjunction with shortening the time before you get a notice of lost item needs to be replaced, like you talked about. And I also think the dollars, the revenue that comes in is sharply reduced by the staff time to manage the fines. So really, we're not talking about a lot of money at this point, I think. So does it make sense to vote on the whole issue at this point? Do we need to talk about it more? Does anyone feel like we need to, Trustee Chen?
Yeah, sorry, I thought if we transition from the question period to the thoughts period, then I wanted to share a few thoughts.
Yeah.
I mean, first, just to really emphasize the point, there's such richness in data, like, it makes it easy for each of us to come to a justifiable conclusion, right? This staff has done tremendous work over a year, to come up with this. And I just sort of want to thank James and, Director Moore and staff for that. I remember in training, the city clerk always told us that we're supposed to make findings based on fact, and we have no shortage of them. Now, we may not all come to the same conclusion, but we all have the same facts and enough facts to come to them. My point of view is I'm trying to avoid taking a philosophical or moral point of view, right? So I think I approach this just more from, what are you getting? So if, I know it's not a guarantee, but if the city, the hypothetical I think is if the city raised our budget by 50,000 or 30,000, whatever it is, how would we like to spend that money? And when I think about spending money, I think about something my father told me when I was young. We said, and he's an educator, not a hedge fund manager. So, we did not have $100 million to throw around the household. And he said, son, if you're going to buy a shirt and you spend $50 and it fits you well and it lasts you 20 years, that's a great buy. If you spend, if you spend $10 for a shirt and it doesn't fit well, that's $10 really not worth spending, right? So I just think about what's the value for the money, and for there, I look at the data, right? So if you look at other libraries, there's a spectrum of results, right? There's Berkeley, on page 13 of the packet, there's Berkeley saying circulation's up 19%. On page 46 of the packet, you have another library saying they saw no increase or decrease in circulation. It's kind of all over the board when you look at other communities. Like, there's just so many other variables. So let's look local, right? So, and on page 18 of the packet, you have Deputy Librarian Singh's analysis about what happened here in San Mateo, right? That in 2016, children's fines were eliminated, yet circulation decreased in the subsequent 2 fiscal years, right? So I think that just speaks to Director Moore's point that perhaps other libraries are overstating a correlation and trying to turn into a causation, right? But here, using our own data for our community, we have not seen any real effect, right? So, so the final point for me is, with the caveat that it's a small sample size, right? There's just kind of a spread of opinions among the public on this, right? There's not clear consensus one way or the other. So, there's not everyone saying let's keep it. There's not everyone saying let's do away with it, right? So it just comes back to like, what do we get for the money, right? And I think for me, there's no clear evidence that we're getting much for the money in terms of, like I said, if the city handed us a check for $50,000 and said, do what you want, is this the best place to place it? And it's not clear to me that there's a lot of returns for spending it on eliminating fines. But so that's kind of like, that's my thoughts. And again, I just want to thank staff for a lot of data that made it easy to stitch together, right? Like, there's, you've got national data, regional data, local data. So it's very comprehensive.
Thank you, Lester.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else have any thoughts to add? Trustee Lynn Harris.
Very quickly, Director Moore, do you know of any libraries that have tied overtly, publicly, their fine collection, although there are so few now, to a specific project, i.e., gee, your fines are going to X or Y or Z?
No, other than this. One of the reasons our fines were shrinking is that many libraries, and we did this too, many libraries collected food around the holidays. And basically what they said is, if you owe a fine, bring in some canned goods. And as long as it is a fine and not a replacement fee, you can have your fines wiped out and help a hungry family. I would like to think that even without fines, we still would be able to collect a good amount of food during the holiday time. But there was definitely an incentive there, because basically canned goods were often less than the equivalent amount in dollars of fines. But it was the gesture of basically saying, do something kind for someone else, and we will eliminate the fines, and we think that's a worthy investment. And I think it made a lot of people feel good. But I'm not aware of any library particularly saying your fines go to this. If anything, I just think the fines just go into the unrestricted funds. And what that is simply the area where we could use the money on anything. And I think that it was something that some libraries were always probably a little uneasy with, because they probably didn't want to be counting on money from people's late fines to pay for essential things. So I think it was just more of this little bit of extra cash that we could use in a variety of ways, and we were usually able to use it, but not considered a formal avenue of revenue.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? This is Director Moore. I take it we've never tried to put a dollar on the staff time spent on fines. If you had to hazard a guess.
Yeah, I didn't try to put a dollar on it. I just really thought it was just going to be so incredibly difficult to do that.
Yeah.
But I would hazard a guess that it is, if I'm guessing, completely guessing. I'm going to hazard a guess when you consider the interchanges that people have with patrons who sometimes get upset at the desk, or the patrons who constantly try to find ways to get their fines reduced. the administrative costs, let me see, I'm trying to think of the amount of time, what people spend time on. I think sometimes staff still call patrons personally to remind them. I can't put a number on it, but I would say
It'd be significant, I imagine.
probably at least $50,000 when you
Right.
when you think of a year, and
Yeah.
I would say it's probably at least $25,000 or $30,000. And I think that is borne out by the reports of pretty much every library. I couldn't put a number on it. I couldn't put a number, but it's not insignificant. That's what I would say.
Right. And the hit on staff morale, et cetera.
That is the single biggest thing that comes up from staff. It is just so hard and damaging, and it's not simply people struggling with money. I'll give this example. We had a mother come in last year, buy everything based on where she lived, etc. She was not struggling for money. But she lost it over a $10 fine. And I asked the staff, well, what else was going on? They said she had 3 kids with her. She was trying to corral the kids, etc., etc. And my guess is that this was a person who was having a rough day, struggling to keep their kids, managed, and going like, I gotta pay this $10 fine. By all accounts, it was her fault. But, in that moment, she was so flustered and upset. And I guess it was the point. And I told them, forgive the fine. In those situations, forgive the fine because the $10 is not worth the frustration and conflict with this patron. And as a matter of fact, that patron will appreciate the kind gesture when they're having a very difficult day. I think it's one of those things that the staff just have to deal with some challenging situations, but I think it's just one of those things that they really, really hate dealing with, and because people can get so upset about it. And so if you're going to ask me if it's worth the amount of upset for the amount that's collected, I can say with confidence, speaking for the staff and my own observations of having been on the front line, it often feels like it is not worth it. It really does feel like it. Now, if someone loses a computer or don't bring a computer back, and that's a $200 item, first of all, usually you're not going to get that back and that person is not going to come back. But if they do, we have no problem saying there's no ifs, ands, and buts. You've got to pay for that if you want to use this library again.
Right.
But a couple of dollars, $5, it doesn't feel like it's worth it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I would like to attempt to vote on our recommendation to City Council on this issue, unless one of the trustees still has items that need to be researched or talked about. I don't want to rush the process, but I feel like we've heard a lot, read a lot. Trustee Lynn Harris?
No, I can ask Director Moore this another time. I don't want to take everyone's time now. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So can I have a motion to vote on fine elimination?
I moved the library and fines.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Great. So let's do the roll call vote on our recommendation to whether we're going to approve elimination of fines.
Okay. Vice Chair Hill, what is your vote?
Aye.
Trustee Diaz-Nash, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Chair DeWinter, what is your vote?
Aye.
Trustee Chin, what is your vote?
Nay.
And Trustee Lynn Harris, what is your vote?
Aye.
Thank you.
So the ayes have it.
Thanks for the vote, everyone. And what I can do is bring some materials for next month to detail how fines are currently handled, and to bring some materials that also demonstrate how other libraries are dealing with the new process, as well as recommendations from the staff on what we think are some good options for handling the end of fines and also maintaining good stewardship of the community's resources.
That sounds good. And I see a hand up, but Trustee Chen, would you like to add something to the record for the minutes on the nay vote?
I'm sorry, Chair DeWinter, I'm slightly confused. I think Trustee Diaz-Nash had her hand up.
Yeah, but I
Oh,
just,
so this is just, okay, okay.
yeah, I saw that.
Okay.
So was there anything that because you voted nay, I just want to see if there was anything you wanted to add to the minutes with your vote. No pressure to do so. I just want to give you a chance.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair DeWinter. Can I give a minute to collect my thoughts and maybe go to Trustee Diaz-Nash first, since I wasn't really
Of
expecting
course.
that.
Oh, I didn't mean to catch you so off guard. Yes, Trustee Diaz-Nash, please.
Okay. I'll bring it up again in the open session at the end for future topics, but I think it would be a really wonderful topic, as the staff has a recommendation in future about how to handle replacement and notification versus fines. And then also, how does the move away from physical objects and toward digital objects, where the library has a much stronger ability just to cut off access? How does staff see that affecting what happens at the library? Because if you have a digital book, you can say, sorry, you don't get it one day longer, period.
So let me make sure I got this right. Staff recommendations or thoughts on the notification of delinquent items post fine. Obviously, the implications of greater usage of e-resources. And was there another one, or are those the two?
Those are the two. Just
okay.
sort of one, how do you deal with what's happening today, and how do you take advantage of what is happening longer term?
Well, one thing I think is the usage of e-resources is yet another thing. The increased uses of e-resources is just another factor that is decreasing the amount of fines that would be collected if more people use those resources. Because like you said, it's impossible to turn those in late.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Trustee Chen?
Yes, thank you for the few minutes to collect my thoughts. I think just to expound it is, the hearing what the other libraries decided had little influence on my, as I weighed the facts that Director Moore and staff brought. In a sense of their staff probably analyzed their local conditions and their local communities feeling sort of subject, and just want to be fair to extrapolate to our, we're here to make a recommendation on behalf of the community of San Mateo, and just as they are to make a behalf of their communities. So trend or not, I didn't weigh that very heavily and sort of tried to ignore it, because I really try to focus on what we had. And it just came down to what my father told me when I was a kid. Even if it's a small amount of money, right? So to Director Moore's point about it's not a big percentage of the budget. But in terms of like what's discretionary, I think in the past we had discussions about like a lot of the budget is fixed. You can't really change it. So it was like a bigger percentage of the discretionary part of the budget, or the flex part, I should say. It just comes down to that sort of $10 shirt example. Like even if it's $10, if it's a bad fitting shirt, or if you're not getting something for it, it's a poor waste of money. And I just think that's the primary thing is like with public dollars, that's sort of the gold standard, no pun intended. Like, do you feel confident? Nothing in life is certain, but like, do you feel confident that you're getting like good value for the money? And I just wasn't confident enough to vote yes. Now, that being said, despite being the minority on this particular vote, I think it was a very good process, right? It was all data-based. The value of having a 5-member board is that, you can, things still move forward, right? You can have, even as 3-2 for 1, things still move forward, and you're not stuck with analysis paralysis. So I think the process, to me, the process was great. It was very thorough. And, even being on the minority on this one doesn't mean I thought it was a bad outcome.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, let's move on to old business item number 4, city librarian update on library restoration of full pre-pandemic service. So Director Moore.
I can be very quick. So we were going to lift the mask mandates on July 18th. On July 15th, Friday, July 16th, the city sent out a message saying to maintain the mask mandate at all city locations. The county followed up shortly thereafter by sending out a message to do the same. As we all know, the Delta variant has altered the landscape once more. So we are maintaining the mask mandate. And what we are seeing now is a lot of activity in the children's area. Still, most people are browsing. We have some studiers, not as many people on the computers as previously, but quite a few browsers and quite a few studiers working on their laptops. As far as reopening to our full restoration of hours in September, we are right on track. I'm seeing faces around here I haven't seen in over a year and a half. They have returned. We have been given the green light to recruit for some key per diem positions. We recently filled the branch supervisor's position, and I will leave that to the official announcement, but simply to say it is a long-term branch person, and that we had a great pool this time, unlike the previous time. And this is a person that I think everyone is excited about because she knows the culture. And we've made it very clear to her that outreach will be a big system-wide outreach, and particularly in the marina area, will be a big part of your job. And that we expect, because the branch staff knows how to run things day to day, we expect you to be very outward looking and to be out in the community, finding opportunities for us to do regular outreach. The only other thing I would like to add about the update is we're fully prepared to return to our previous hours. As you all know, I have just completed the final draft of a patron survey about our hours for all 3 locations. I'm also going to do an internal staff survey. I've been directed not to cut our service hours, but I've also think I made it pretty clear that prior to the pandemic, I was concerned about some of the things happening at the main library between 8 and 9, particularly in a parking lot, particularly with closing. And I had also gotten some intimations that there were some days in which people would like to see us open earlier. So there's a possibility, and I think this would take considerable time. If what I think is true and is supported, I will be frank. I frankly think right now that there could be a better allocation of our hours than being open till 9 o'clock Monday through Thursday. And that it might be better that if we close at 8 on those nights and maybe open an hour earlier on those days, or we're open longer on a Sunday or Friday or Saturday. But I want to see what patrons feel. I want to see what staff feel. And as of now, because I don't think this will be worked out before we fully reopen, I think there's a number of things that go into such a process. We are prepared to return to our regular full hours at the beginning of September. We know that there are people who are champing at the bit to get passports. So we are preparing in August to open the passport office. And as far as our cafe, there are some physical repairs that need to take place. And I wish we could have done it last year when we had all of that surplus, but the cafe owner was not ready to review it. So we have had Public Works come over here, and it will take months, but they are going to review bids and pricing to replace the floor at the cafe, because that's the condition, one of the conditions that the cafe owner of 3B said that they would really like to have fixed for them to return. And we need to make some repairs to the hot water system. One of the reasons why eventually we would really love to have the cafe on the first floor, in addition to better access for parents and seniors, is that our hot water heater is on the first floor, or I believe in the parking lot. And there seems to be some issue with hot water having to travel up 3 floors and causing inconsistencies. So our current facility supervisor says that he thinks that there's a relatively simple fix that could be put at the hot water place, the hot water location closer to where they turn on the hot water. And he's going to try that, but it has been an intermittent problem for years. And so once we get that worked out, we are finally confirmed from the 3B's Cafe people that they're like, we would really like to come back. We really, as where just a couple of months ago, they had said, we're not interested in coming back before 2022.
Yeah.
So they really changed their tune, probably because they feel that there's a bit more certainty in the air.
Great.
I'm open to questions if anyone would like to ask.
This is maybe not directly related. What about accepting books? Is that something that's being talked about, or have I missed discussion about that?
That's a very good question, Trustee Hill. So I know there's a huge amount of pent-up demand for people to donate books again. And the last report I got well, first of all, there's a little bit of a challenge because our former head of community services got the job of senior management analyst. And so she's kind of doing both while recruiting for her old position. So there's a vacancy there. But then there's also the process of bringing back the volunteers to process the items. For the last several weeks, we have had a couple of librarians covering it on an appointment basis, and they just were overwhelmed. So right now, we are just having the senior management analyst, former volunteer coordinator / community services coordinator, trying to get as many volunteers back as possible, to do it safely and to get them into place so that they can begin to start accepting donations again. I can't put a hard date on it, except to say that she said to me optimistically, she thinks it can be done and it can be set up in the next several weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. But that is far from a promise, because some of it is just getting the volunteers back and getting them reacclimated, and also just trying to figure out how things are going to go as far as the new twists and turns for the virus. But I anticipate that that will be in place at the latest by September and possibly sooner. And we are very, very aware that there's a lot of pent-up demand for people to start donating items again and working on it as fast as it can be done.
Great, thank you. Trustee Diaz-Nash? Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
You're muted.
About that. I can testify that everything Director Moore says is true. It's the one thing everybody always asks me, but I also tell them exactly what you just said, Director Moore, that the library staff is working as hard as they can to get there. But the comment I wanted to make, or I guess call out, is what was just mentioned about how City Manager Corbett, or the city management team, right before Director Moore said they were going to get rid of the mask mandate, came back and said, no, it's gotta stay. And just everyone, let's talk about that again in the next item when Trustee Chen and I talk about what is policy, what is procedure, who has what authority over what. This is continues to be a very confusing area, because before, a lot of the library staff said they did not want to get rid of the mask mandate because there were so many young patrons, but the city decided it was time to get rid of it across city-wide establishments. And now it's changed. So I think this is a great example for discussion momentarily when we talk about this item.
If I may add quickly, the library staff flip-flopped also. After, for a while, being vehemently against getting rid of the mask mandate, after a lot of people became vaccinated, they started to say, and they had to police it, they started to say that they were ready to get rid of it, and we're looking forward to it. That said, I think, I think that the San Mateo patrons are an exceptionally respectful group. We had a small, maybe 3 people where there has been an issue, but I think most people are following the news and they're okay with continuing to wear their masks. And some people are lowering their masks. And if we're not running around trying to catch them, but when we have staff walk around, if I walk around, when we approach them and politely ask them, 99.9% of the time, the person says, no problem, and does it. So that's nice.
That's great. Any other questions? Thanks for the update. Okay, moving right along to old business, item 5, clarification of policies versus operations. So I will turn it over to our subcommittee, Trustee Chen and Diaz-Nash.
Thank you, Chair DeWinter. So Trustee Diaz-Nash and I flipped a coin before this meeting, and I won the coin toss, so I'm going to go first, but we're going to go back and forth. So I think, let's just kind of, set the context. Like, what are we trying to attempt to do with this topic? Well, since the Olympics are happening as we speak, perhaps that's a good analogy. The board and staff, we're part of the same team, part of the library team, trying to serve the public. And part of being a good team is kind of knowing what your position is and kind of how you pass the ball. I do favor ball sports. I know there are non-ball sports, so I'm not trying to favor the ball sports, but knowing how you pass the ball, to your teammate. So Trustee Diaz-Nash and I, we put together this framework about various decisions. To know your position, sometimes you have to know what the other positions are. So we definitely captured our impression of things that are, we felt were wholly within staff domain, merely just to provide a complete picture. If we've been a little amiss on the details or incorrect, that's sort of unintentional. We didn't spend as much time there because it's really just to paint a fuller picture so everyone can kind of see like, hey, this is the whole landscape. The intent of this is to really come up with a set of questions to ask, our coach. So in this analogy, that'd be probably as a first starting point, our city council liaison, to kind of like ask the coach, like, hey, can you help us like understand our position a little bit better? So what we're like to sort of discuss is really the four questions at the end, right? That's kind of where we feel like there's points of uncertainty that we want to get guidance on, and that's what we like to get out of this. So that being said, well, I think let's try to follow the normal format. So pretend we've just presented like Director Moore does. Let's have a round of questions from the other trustees to see if anything about the materials that we put together was unclear. And then once that's satisfied, we kind of, again, like if folks can go around and sort of say like, yeah, I agree this is a question we should ask, or can we modify this, or let's not ask this question, or perhaps even there's a fifth question or a sixth question that we're going to clarification on, right? So I think that's really the outcome. Like hopefully we can be one and done on this in terms of arriving at the questions, and then we can go get clarification and then digest it in a future meeting.
And if I could follow up from Director Chen, I think he put it all very well. We went back and forth and back and forth. So it wasn't as if we sat down over a cup of coffee and said, okay, this is it, of course, end of story. And so there are, for us, I think that it's a three-dimensional. Director Chen talks about the Olympics. I talk about chess, that it's three-dimensional chess here, because there are, as the title of this document says, what is clear and what needs clarification. That's one set of questions, and that's what we ask our Olympic liaison coach, Councilmember Pappen. But then there is an ongoing, just general question of what is policy that the board weighs in on, what are operational procedures that are clearly what the librarian and staff lead on and may not even need our, or should come to us for input, as well as what are sort of the day-to-day things. And we tried to create those three areas of the grid just to try and clarify questions. So, as an example, a lot of the operations, clearly, there's, at least from our perspective, and you may disagree, but from our perspective, there is absolutely no need for the board to weigh in, perhaps as an individual who says, I want the cafe to be open more hours, but not as a board. There are operational procedures that we tried to look at as guidelines focused on staff activities, and policy, which was more patron facing, as just ways of trying to clarify the discussion. But where we really saw the areas where our original mandate came from as a subcommittee were, what are the kinds of questions that we really can't, there's no clear answer. And that's why I came back to this mask mandate. Is it patron? Is it, is it staff? Does the city manager get to come in and say, whatever I think makes sense for the city? Everyone just has to agree. Those are the areas where our original mandate as a subcommittee were focused. But I think we came up with some other discussion areas as well. But I would suggest we at least initially discuss the unclear examples that need clarification, or that we make sure we come out of this meeting with clear feedback on those. And then there could be lots of other discussions as well, but those would be the priority.
Great. I just want to thank you for your work. And I actually appreciated the three categories: policy, operational procedures, operations. I thought that was a good way actually to break it up. for us to talk about. I'd like to know if any of the trustees have thoughts, and of course, Director Moore, I'm interested to hear your thoughts as well. Yeah, you're muted, but go ahead. You have to unmute. You're muted. Yeah.
First of all, thank you all for organizing your thoughts in the form of a document that's very easy to read. And I think that it is well done to break it down in this way. I also want you all to know that the Assistant City Attorney, Bahar Abduhali, our liaison, is also open to coming to a meeting to discuss and clarify. She's spending some time reviewing the charter, and she's open to also coming to discuss the charter itself. Now, I'm looking at the document that you all shared, and I noticed, let's take one example of sort of unclear. Regulations for the use of conference rooms, such as how many people can reserve it. Can you run a business out of one? This is unclear because it's both patron behavior and how to make using the rooms efficient. So, my personal view is the number of people that are in a room, and there was no policy for the first 10 years of the meeting rooms. And when I came on board, I could tell there was a policy that was needed, and that was when we decided to make a policy in 2018. I think things such as the number of people in a meeting room, the limitations that were put there, the guidelines that were put there were based upon over a decade's worth of observation, particularly from frontline staff who were dealing with the frustrations, the happiness, the joy, whatever, and that a lot of those things were based largely upon saying, what have you seen for the last 10 years? What are the tendencies? For example, saying in the room on the second floor that it should be 2 to 6 people as opposed to, or 2 to 6 people as opposed to allowing one person to reserve it. There was a great deal of conversation over that. And one of the reasons was that, there are plenty of places for one person to study, to have a video conference, and to meet, in very few places for 6 people in the library. So that's just one example. But something like running a business, I think it is complex and it's challenging. You were very right to put it in the unclear category. For example, one of the reasons why we came up with time limits on the small conference study rooms were there are people running businesses. We know that there are people who tutor students. And before there was a policy, they would be in a room for 8 hours, taking one student after another. And we decided, at least at that time, and this group, I think this group was largely present with the exception of Rod, that part of what we do at the library is that, we encourage industry, we encourage something that is a mutually beneficial capitalist endeavor. So we didn't necessarily have anything against someone providing tutorial, but I think at the end of it, it was just sort of we think this is the best thing that we could do. It's not really hurting anyone for someone to tutor kids, but we wanted to put a limit on the amount of time that they could be in a room running their business. We also had read stories about people who had started their businesses in our small conference rooms. Some of them had made pretty good and wrote back saying, because of your small conference room, I was able to, work on my venture. And of course, we found that once we limited the tutors to 1 hour or 2 hours a day for the small conference rooms, there's ways to get around it. They could just have different parents reserve the rooms. And technically that's a different party, but they're here running a business. So I still think that's a good question, a reasonable one to discuss. It's been 3 years since the initial policy was made, and we've had 3 more years of observation. But I think at that time we landed on the idea that, well, kids need tutors and they're getting tutored. We have people running a small business, is not necessarily disruptive. Okay, let's see how we can accommodate that without allowing someone to monopolize the space. So I guess I'm not making general comments. I'm just referring to just a couple of things, thoughts that I have on things that I see on your document, which is very thoughtfully prepared.
Does anyone else have any thoughts or comments?
I have a couple of thoughts, but one is, would you categorize the question of a group of 6 seniors that are members of a book group that would like to reserve a room once a month for 2 hours?
So we've actually had similar requests as that, and that's totally possible. The issue is that we cannot say every month, as far as the small conference rooms go, we cannot say every month this room is reserved for this group on this day and no one else can reserve it. Now, if those seniors entered into some sort of partnership with Cynthia McCarthy, who runs our book groups, and it was a willing partnership, something that she was interested in, it was mutually beneficial because she carefully plans her book groups, then that's a library program. And that could take place in one of the different meeting rooms. But if those seniors said, look, we pretty much know every month that we want to meet in this room, they could try to reserve that room every month, but we couldn't guarantee them, like say the conference room that holds 2 to 8 people, we couldn't guarantee them that every month on that same day they could get that room.
My question is not so much whether it can be done or not, but is that a policy question or not a policy question, I guess is my question.
My view is the policy has been decided. And so the policy, rather the procedure has been decided when we decided to put limitations in the effort to be as egalitarian as possible in providing access to the meeting rooms. So the procedure was basically, this is the least of evils that we think can get the most people access to the room. So I believe that is a procedural question, but I think it's very difficult to like completely separate policy from procedure. And the way I see it is the procedure is based upon observations, feedback from staff, community, board. And then after deciding on that procedure, then we come together and talk about what is the best policy to make sure that this procedure can minimize conflict between patrons with one another, between patrons and staff, and allow the smoothest operation possible. So to me, that is a procedural question, because we've decided that we don't let any group of people have one of the small conference meeting rooms at the same time every month. We've decided that the best way to provide fair access was to say that any person can reserve that room, I think up to a week in advance, no sooner, and that everyone has an equal opportunity to do that. And to me, the policy is, how do we write that and how do we communicate that to the public in such a way that the staff can give them a clear idea of what to expect on how best to access and use the room. That's just what I think, that's the best way I can articulate what I think at this moment. And I'm obviously open.
Just one final comment on that. Not on the merits of it so much, just in understand. If one attitude that the library might take is the enormous potential support for the library would be to provide a way for reading groups to have a place to meet in the library itself. And I assume that that's a policy question that would have enormous procedural implications. But am I right in saying that that would be a policy question in the library? Say, we would like to develop stronger ongoing support with reading groups in our community?
Well, I'll take a chance at weighing in on that first, and then obviously the other trustees can. I believe it's a procedural question with policy implications. And the reason for that is this. We've had these questions over the years. We've had people who say, I have a special relationship with the library. Can you give me the room every month at this time? The HIPAA people do that. And we continue to do it. Then they start to say, now that you give it to us once a month, can we get it once a week? Then it started to be, can we get it several times a week? Well, you can imagine that with the number of groups that would love to have access to those rooms on a regular basis, we get far more requests than we can accommodate. So with the HIPAA people, I had to say, we're already making a special concession for you because we realize that you're helping seniors at risk to access benefits they otherwise would not be able to do. But once a month has to be something that we can decide, because beyond that, it starts to be like we are preventing other worthy groups from having equal access to the room. And believe you me, I get a number of calls from worthy groups saying we're helping people. Can you do this especially for us? It is terribly hard for me to say no, because there are far more worthy groups needing space and time than we can accommodate. So the only way that we could do it is procedurally to say, we can make some exceptions that because of you're meeting an important need. And take, for example, a senior reading group. There may be a situation where we could say, we could make room for a senior reading group to meet. But I guarantee you, it's not as simple as you think. If we block off that particular time every week, it's going to cause conflicts with every month, it's going to cause conflicts with other groups, like we provide space for the county to use it. We provide space for other city departments. Everyone that we try to make a special accommodation for leads to a conflict with another worthy group that wants to use that room. Not to mention, we also give up revenue.
So I think just to maybe change the focus a bit, right? As Director Moore said, it's been 3 years on this particular policy. Maybe it needs some revisiting, but that's not what we're trying to attempt to do tonight. I think that discussion between Trustee Hill and Director Moore just underscores that this is one of the unclear areas, right? So I think that seems to be a takeaway, and we can kind of have some consensus on that, that's an example of an unclear area. And we shouldn't try to unmuddy the waters tonight, as that's not the intent of this agenda item. So with that reframe, are there any other questions about either the document or comments about additional unclear areas, or whether an area is actually, hey, maybe it was unclear to you and Trustee Diaz-Nash, but to the rest of us, it's kind of clear as crystal.
I think James needs to
Clear to
unmute.
me.
Yeah. What's that? What were you saying? Oh, Director Moore.
I just said it's clear to me because I think that what Trustee Nash and Trustee Chin set out to do was to keep us on track and to do some work in defining the parameters of the question of policy versus procedure. And I find this document helpful. I still think there's a ways to go, but I agree with you, Dr. Chin. Trustee Hill, I think your questions are worthy, but I think they may be too particular for this particular conversation, and that we're trying to define the broad parameters. But as you know, you can always call me up, or we could always have a coffee and talk in more detail about this.
Can I maybe then ask the group to take a look at our second question, which is what principles should we use to differentiate among policy, operational procedures, and operations? Not so much the unclear examples, but the fact that we tried to say a policy that the board would get engaged in broadly affects what is allowed for patrons to do at the library or with library resources, where, you know, operational procedures perhaps priority-wise are focused on staff activities, and operations are just specific day-to-day guidelines to make sure that everything works. Is that a useful framework?
Yes.
Yeah, it is to me.
Yes.
Okay. Then the third question is, for policy decisions without financial implications, which body is the decision maker and what's the board's role? We've got some examples here, but more of a question to keep in mind and use it as a filter for future discussions, because we can't think of every example. So as an example here, you know, if it doesn't have financial implications, we're saying by and large, the librarian decides that is the librarian and staff's purview, but that they at their discretion may say, we want to get input from the board to help us make sure we're thinking of everything. Director Chen, is there anything you want to add to that?
First, just before it gets too late to correct it, I once had a boss call me by the wrong name for a year because I didn't correct him early enough. Trustee Chen, I'm not director of anything at the moment.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough. Thank you.
So sorry. True story. I'll tell anyone about it later. But yes,
Okay.
someone called me by the wrong name, and it was just too late. So, no, I guess I think just questioning the other trustees, right? Is this a question we want to get clarification on, right? I think Trustee DS Nash is being very good by being very methodical. Let's go through them. Like we've kind of agreed on the first two. So on question number 3, is this phrasing of the question a question we want to get clarification from our liaison and or the assistant city attorney?
Trustee Chen, I'm sorry, could you restate that, please?
Yeah, so the purpose of this agenda item is to arrive at a set of questions we want to get clarification on. So Trustee DS Nash and I have come up with these 4. It seems that we have consensus on the first 2. Yep. We're now on the third one, as she's been very helpfully making sure we go through all of them in order. And so is question 3, as phrased, like a question we want to ask our liaison to provide guidance on.
Right. And that, are you asking what that is? Number 3?
I'm asking
Oh,
if
no,
this is the way we should ask the question.
Right. Oh, but I was asking trustee Lynn Harris.
Oh, sorry.
Were
I
you
apologize, Chairman.
That's okay. Were you asking what number 3 is?
No, I guess my thought is that the board ourselves are always, that is our role, to provide, not necessarily, not to make decisions, but to provide input based upon our experiences as citizens of the city, as patrons of the library, et cetera. So when I look at, what is the board's role, and maybe if I'm confusing myself and you here, I don't look at it as that is our role, to provide input, not to make decisions, but to suggest to, as you have here, the librarian, to give the librarian what we, would suggest, if that makes sense.
So where it says board decides, you would say maybe not that word.
That's where I don't know. I just don't know. Are there things we technically decide? I was not aware that we decide things.
That's a good point.
If I may weigh in, I think that's the sort of thing that perhaps having either your representatives speak with Bahar or the city manager to represent you, arrange a meeting, or to have Bahar come to one of these meetings. But I would like to point out that this board, like all San Mateo city boards and commission, is an advisory board. Typically, that means that other than the things that are designated, like accepting gifts, etc., that you advise and not necessarily decide. That's my interpretation. I could be wrong. And I would love for you all to get further clarification. I think that's why we are here. I also would like to add that I take your advisement very seriously, and I take it into real consideration. And it is not just an exercise of going through the motions for me.
Appreciate that. Trustee Diaz-Nash.
Thank you. I think that at least my understanding and memory of the conversations we had, Trustee Chen, around question 3 was pertaining to policy decisions without financial implications. Which body is the decision maker and what is the board's role? Not what is the board's role as the mega question of all mega questions.
No, that's right, Trustee Stash. So
Right.
Trustee Harris, if you, in the table, if you look at the last row, right, and in the first column, the question 3 pertains to that that cell in particular, right? Where I think you were kind of feeling like, hey, it's the board forms a recommendation and someone else decides, or is it like on this row specifically the board decides, right? So I think that's the question being posed by number 3.
Thank you.
Do we need further discussion on this, or do we generally agree with number 3? Does anyone object to the wording in number 3? I'll put it that way. Maybe we can go to number 4.
Yeah. So I think number 4 is just like, is there a switching analogies for a second, since I used to, we're going to go through all my interests. So I used to take ballroom dance many years ago. So, there's a leader role and a follower role. So in terms of like a policy review, like who leads, who initiates the review, right? So the decision is kind of covered in question 3, but question 4 is about like, who kicks off the process, right? Is it generally, board driven? Is it generally staff driven, or it can be a mix of both?
And I think to add to that, that as we've seen in past several meetings, typically it has been staff that has brought an issue forward, or like with final elimination. We need, we've done the research. Here's our recommendation. We would be very interested in your recommendation, board. Ultimately, it's city council. Are there any times when the board would say, you know, it seems as if, and this may be a very hypothetical question, but that there is a policy that is necessary in X area, and staff, for whatever reason, doesn't see the need for that policy, or it's just a very low priority. Is there any role in that situation for the board to say, we believe there should be a policy and we would like to bring it to this forum for discussion and recommendation or lack thereof?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, once again, you know, I think this is something that perhaps the city attorney can help clarify. Unfortunately, many of these things do not have 100% objective answers. And I can only speak for myself to say, I don't know if this is addressed in the charter, but for me personally, you 100% can bring that. And I think what I owe the board, to honor the board, to respect the board, is not to say, you know, when you come up with something, I'm just going to say yes, or I'm going to reflexively say no, but rather that I'm going to take it seriously, and then I'm going to review it. I'm going to review it with the management team. And then if there are people on the staff who it could directly impacts, I'm going to review it with them. If it seems like something that we should also get patron feedback from, then I'm willing to facilitate the survey or the collection of information from the community. All the steps that need to be taken to review it, I'm committed to doing that. And I'm totally comfortable and supportive of the board putting forth a policy suggestion that they would like for us to review. That you would like for me and the staff here to lead the review of, I am totally comfortable with that. I'm totally committed to that. I would think that you wouldn't put it forth unless you've really thought about it and you've really seen that it is something that is worth consideration. And if I end up not agreeing with that recommendation, what I think is that I owe you all a very thorough and thoughtful breakdown of how I came to that conclusion. And if there are aspects of that conclusion that you all still think are problematic, then I'm committed to readdressing that particular thing in a way that we can feel satisfied that it was reviewed. So I don't know if there's a formal mechanism that says that's what's supposed to be done, but I can just tell you as a city librarian, that's something that I think that I know that I would do. I'm glad to do it. I'm committed to doing it. And I think that it could give us better service and policies if ideas go from both ways.
Great. Thank you. Trustee Lynn Harris.
Thank you, Chair DeWinter. Yes, I was very, very briefly just going to mention in essence what Director Moore said. Depending on the definition of the word initiate, I would actually feel it would be quite odd if members of the library board were not able to initiate, again, depending on how broadly that's defined, discussions about policies. I mean, that's, so that I would say certainly anybody would be, you know, any of those three groups, I would imagine would be almost encouraged to be studying and analyzing and putting forth things that they may have questions about or see could be improved.
Thank you. So of number 4, do any of the trustees object to that wording?
Well, Chair DeWinter, I do wonder if it's moot, right? If we've already reached consensus that it's both,
And we don't need, okay,
perhaps it's become a moot question.
I agree.
Okay.
So can we talk about next steps then?
Yeah, so I mean, I think so I think where are we, right? So we've kind of reviewed the framework, made sense. Unclear examples are good examples. Of the 4 questions, the first 3 seems like the ones we want to get further guidance on. And I think the question is, whom do we get guidance from next and in what format? I would think, I would propose starting with our liaison. I mean, that's kind of.
Liaison with the
there's-
city, the assistant city attorney.
Yes.
Okay.
No, actually, Councilwoman Pappen, right, who's
Okay,
the
well,
liaison for the library board. I was just starting with Councilwoman Pappen as whom, and then at the forum, I I think let's have a discussion. I think there's many different ways, so I'm be curious what my fellow trustees feel like the best forum would be.
Trustee Diaz-Nash.
I think in addition to what Trustee Chen is saying, one of the questions to Council Member Pappen would be, what is the best way to try and address this? Would you recommend that we go and get input from the Assistant City Attorney prior to having the discussion with you? I mean, I think the point here is she is our liaison, so we should, out of respect, say, here are some questions, you're our liaison, we'd like to talk to you, but one of the questions is, do you direct us to the Assistant, City Attorney? In terms of where and how, I would think, I'm all for streamlining things, so whether it was Councilwoman Pappen or the Assistant City Attorney, why not have that person speak with us in this forum, as opposed to having 2 people go and talk to them and then bring it back, and then it's just too much telephone. So that's a personal opinion of mine.
Any other trustees have any thoughts? I mean, I think that's a great idea if she's able to attend our meeting. I think that would be the most efficient way. I think though, I don't want to catch her off guard. So I think you just need to prep her with some kind of document like this, maybe this document, but so she has time to think about it maybe before our meeting. Does anyone else? Yeah. Trustee Diaz-Nash.
Just going on with that, my guess is that she would turn to the Assistant City Attorney,
Yeah.
to get input. So if we were to give this to her and invite her, that we should make the option of talking to the Assistant City Attorney very explicit.
Yeah, who's already offered to do that.
Right, I think that should just be, but out of respect, we go to her, her first.
I think that makes sense. Well, would we do that through me or through Director Moore?
I think it would go through you, Chair DeWinter, right? Just
Okay.
I think you are the chair.
Right. Okay.
And so we have this document, and yeah, I mean, excluding question 4, and maybe just perhaps the next step is if you were to send this to Councilwoman Pappen and ask like, hey, here's the questions we have. What would you advise us on the best way to get these questions answered? As a starting point, Director Moore has indicated that Assistant City Attorney Behar could be another resource, but certainly, want to hear your thoughts.
Great. I will do that. Any other thoughts, trustees? No. Okay, I will do that and get back to you. Hopefully before the next meeting, so we'll know what's happening.
Thank you, Chair DeWinter.
Thank you very much for your work, both of you. Okay, let's move along to reports and announcements. I have a quick announcement. I don't know the order here, but I'll go first. I actually met with Councilwoman Pappen at the Marina branch last week. I felt that it was possible she had never been to the branch. to see, that's a personal interest of mine since we had our meeting there, that she should become familiar with that branch and some of the issues there. So we just toured the building basically and talked a little bit about some of the structural issues. And, you know, I didn't really offer opinions on what I thought should be done, but I just wanted to bring to her attention that there were some structural issues with the floor and things like that. So that's just my report. Should we go around? Trustee Diaz-Nash?
Sure. I in terms of updates, I, along with a couple of other trustees, went to the reception last week and Executive Director Esselstein for Jillian Schuster and the marvelous collection. And it was such an incredibly fun time and everyone was so excited to be there. I think it's a great opportunity to start to get back into the library. And there certainly was an appetite for that. And then in terms of future topics, as I mentioned before, I'd love to get staff's thinking after they've had a chance to talk about what happens if fines are eliminated, what happens to replacement notification and any trends that they're seeing toward digital usage. And then I wanted to bring up again the idea of, is the library's policy on art aligned with, or are there areas of misalignment, the city's policy in terms of if an individual wants to make a donation of a piece of art to the library, how does that all align? And I bring that up because there has been some discussion about that. And I don't know the timing of it, but I just want to make sure that that if there is an issue to be discussed, we discuss it so we don't slow down any individual's desire to donate art that the city may wish to accept.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Hill?
I also attended the reception and led to a couple of questions. I would like to get reviewed how people get ideas for receptions, looked at. What do outside people come in and encourage artists to make presentations, whatever, and just our whole connection to art. As Lisa raised, I would very second that idea of taking a look at that at a meeting.
Great, thank you. Trustee Chen?
Not much of a report. I do regret I missed the reception. I'm still not personally comfortable with large groups yet. So I'm sure everything was spaced, but I do regret I missed it from the announcements. It looked like quite a. I really was interested in the art, but regrets on that one.
Great, thank you. Trustee Len Harris?
Thank you, Chair DeWinter. I went to the reception as well. It was wonderful. The art was very interesting and extremely impressive, far beyond anything I could ever even imagine. I did want to comment, Chair DeWinter, on, you mentioned that you visited the Marina branch, and I did as well. And you were infinitely more tempered than I would have been, and you're kind of just sharing with us the state of the building. I mean, I was literally aghast. For those of you that haven't been there, there is a slope inside the building that goes down towards the little waterway, and then there's a little bit of a, I don't want to say a buckling, but a bend in the ceiling inside. Those are, I was stunned. I mean, those are really significant issues to me. So I think, something needs to be looked at somewhere. Now, I was assured by Maynard that the engineer has said everything's fine, but that didn't seem to be, I mean, okay, I will defer. The other thing is the signage, I don't know what can be done about the signage for that branch. There's two little tiny signs on the street on Norfolk that are maybe, 12 inch. I didn't get out of my car and measure them. They're on the same pole going both directions, 12 inches by 4 inches. And the one that you would see going southbound is on the side of the street when you pass the street on which the library sits. So I was just wondering if there could be something more prominent put up there. And then finally, I'm just wondering, when we do get back into person for meetings, I'm wondering if it would be of any benefit to kind of alternate our meeting sites among, the main branch, and then go to the Marina branch, and then go to the Hillsdale branch. It might be kind of interesting. And I think it would be good for the people that work at the branches to see us kind of on site. They might really appreciate that. And, it shows kind of that we're caring and interested. So
I'm so glad you said that, because I believe it was Trustee Chen and Hill, maybe, who suggested we meet at the branch.
Trustee Hill.
Trustee Hill. And the reason I know the state of the Marina branch is because we met there prior to the pandemic. And I believe Trustee Chen was out of the country at the time, but you called in and we were all sitting in the little room.
Yes,
having our meeting.
I called in from Taipei.
Taipei.
So that was my excuse for not being there in person.
Yeah, so my issue, I didn't notice the time had changed, so I was actually half an hour early to the meeting and walked around. And I too was aghast and surprised. We knew there were some issues, but until you see it in person, it's not it's not the same. So that's why I suggested Councilwoman Pappen, meet me there.
very, very quickly, it literally, I went down, kind of proceeded north through the stacks and came back around. And that's my first look at the slope. And for a split second, I wasn't, no, that can't be right. My mind wasn't believing what my eyes were telling me it was sloping as. So anyway, quite
Yeah.
alarming.
And I do recall mentioning too that this size sign on the street was not adequate. It's the size of a piece of paper.
Is it
But I know
that,
that's
that big?
that has come up before. But I appreciate you bringing it up again.
No, sorry for reiterating things that have already been stated.
No, and we do owe the Hillsdale branch, I think, a meeting at some point when we go back to in person.
I wanted to just throw out, this is probably a crazy idea, but when you mentioned Pappen meeting with you, just a few yards from the library is a huge redevelopment project when they get rid of the restaurant. And I just wonder whether anybody in the city has even been talking with a developer in relationship to the land that the library's on. I mean, I think sometimes you're able to negotiate amazing things when you have somebody that's trying to make a lot of money.
I agree. Yep. I don't know the answer, but I do know there's more information now. So for, if it comes up. Okay, I'm just moving right on to Library Foundation Executive Director Lynn Esselstein.
Hello, everyone. How are you? It was delightful to see so many of you in person at the art reception on Thursday. It was an interesting event. We were not notified by the organizers that we were going to be a recipient potentially of designated funds for the sales of any of the art. I found out because somebody forwarded me a solicitation email, which I encourage. I mean, this is probably a one-off because I believe, I think it was Susan Lake, it was organizing that. This is the relationship she has with the artist, but it did prompt a couple of interesting emails and, trying to suss out how this works because we've never come across this before. So there was another nonprofit designated, which was Samaritan House. And so I guess we'll get an accounting at some point. It was nice to be included. It's an interesting setup. So I would be interested in continuing this conversation at an appropriate time. But regardless, I agree, it was a lovely reception, and there were many people there that it was fun to say hello to, because we haven't seen each other in such a long time in person. Not much going on, but plenty going on. The board did not meet this month, so we haven't had a meeting of the executive committee or the board of directors. They took July off for vacations. Staff, however, has been very busy. We're in process on creating Library Link. We're a little bit past deadline this year, but it seems to be finally coming together. There is a solicitation that will be going out for, excuse me, a legacy fund, founding members. That'll probably arrive the beginning of next week. If you're already a legacy fund founding member, you won't get a solicitation. But the idea is that we have bequest money that we are investing. That fund is now worth over $1 million. And since we've invested it, it's already earned $25,000. The idea behind this is that there is a plaque that will be dedicated in the main library. James, thank you very much for being so accommodating, and you and your staff are being very helpful. And we will be acknowledging these sort of seed members for a $500 designated donation as founding members. It really is a lead-in to a renewed planned giving campaign. But we're hoping to grab some interesting names and well-known ones in the current time period for the library, and that will be displayed in perpetuity. So that's happening. The only other thing I wanted to report on is the Friends of the Library. As you may know, the foundation is the sort of, I think fiscal agent is actually a term of art, but basically what we do is we help them with their money. We deposit all of the book sales through our bank account, and then we cut checks to the library during the grant season to pass on the Friends sales for collections. We supply, as part of the book sales, a dedicated iPad for the point of sale for PayPal here. And that thing's been on the blank for the last month. So I have spent a disproportionate amount of my time running back and forth, deleting apps and all this kind of stuff. I did one final thing today. I hope it works out. It may be that we need to invest in a new iPad, but I'm pleased to report that because the library is open, we're actually selling books again. And to the point that James made about the donations being suspended, I was initially planning to make a big call to action in Library Link, come and donate your books. But I am well aware that Carla Avitabile and Paul Vaughn have been incredibly supportive over the last several months and given up a lot of their professional focus and time to help us sort through inventory, clean out all of the old Friends stuff, and where possible, make appointments to accept some donations. And just this last week, I was contacted by an estate who said, can you take a donation? I've probably got close to 80 boxes of books. And so I forwarded it on to Paul and Carla, and I said, I don't know if you want to do this, but when they say estate, I think dollar signs, maybe there's something good in there. And they, out of the kindness of their hearts, and maybe because they also like selling books, took it on, and was pleased to report that the first 15 boxes that were delivered yielded some really great stuff. So I'm glad that we have some inventory. I do sincerely look forward to replenishing our volunteer base there at the library and getting the Friends back up and running, because this is an important source of income for the library around collection maintenance. And of course, we are very desirous, after a long year of COVID that still seems to be going on, to replenish that for you guys. So that's all I think that's all I have. Anybody run across me lately or have an email exchange with something that was important that I neglected to mention tonight? Okay, that's
Thank you so much. Before adjourning, I just wanted to ask Director Moore if you had any anything else you wanted to add?
Sure, I'll keep it quick. First of all, Dina, you don't have to write this because it's not really part of the report. I'll get to that in a minute. I just want to say there was one thing I forgot to mention. There's also a space issue when it comes to accepting donations. The last haul was so big that one of the things that's reported is that we need to clear out some inventory to make space for new inventory. Okay, now I'll do the report. So I just wanted to say, I just wanted to mention, since there's not a super lot going on, I feel like I've talked about quite a few things that we're up to in the section about reopening. I just wanted to highlight a program that I think is really great here at the library. And it's a program called Pause for Tales. And it's available to children 5 and up. And it allows them to improve their reading skills by reading aloud to a therapy dog. The dogs and the handlers are from the Peninsula Humane Society and the SPCA's Pet Assisted Therapy programs. If you've never experienced this, it's really wonderful, because the reasons the the therapy dogs are brought in is because they are the calmest, most unjudgmental and loving animals you'll encounter. And you will see some kids who are reluctant readers forget about themselves, and they start stroking the dog while they're reading, and they start to realize that they actually can read. So that's just one beautiful piece of magic that gets to happen here. It's a durable program. It's been going on for like over a decade. And whoever thought of it was just a genius. So, the only other thing I would like to report is that, I went to story time in the park at Beresford Park last week, and there were about 70 people there to participate, parents, families, and kids. And one more thing, we are in earnest. We have begun the branch enhancement project. Ruxana is leading that process. She began it last fiscal year. She has $160,000 to spend on each branch for upgrades. That's $80,000 per branch. It doesn't buy as much as you think, but it will add some nice touches, some new shelves, a new service desk. And I just want you all to know that you all bringing recognition to the fact that our branches have some issues that need to be addressed, improved, potentially rebuilt and replaced. I fully support it. I 100% support it. One of the challenging things for me when I first came here was to see how beautiful and striking our main library was, and to go to the branches and see that they are very well loved and precious to the communities, but they simply, because of their age and the amount of wear and tear, cannot facilitate the sort of services that people really need from libraries at this point in the 21st century. And I just would really, really like to address that issue however I can. If I could wave a magic wand, I would completely upgrade those branches or see to it that they could be replaced tomorrow. I agree with you. The Marina Library, like I said, is well loved, but the issues with the foundation and the floor, we are told they are safe. We had a structural engineer review, but they are unsettling. And I really, really appreciate any support that we can get to address those issues and provide better service and better facilities to the people in those communities.
Right. Thanks so much. And does anyone else have anything to add before we adjourn? No, well, thank you so much for your patience with me for my first meeting on Zoom. And I look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting. So it's 7:51. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you, everyone. Great job. Great job, President DeWinter.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Congratulations, Chair DeWinter. Thank you.
Thank you.